Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. This is a case study on volunteerism, and just for background, in the 1960s and 70s, the New Zealand Forest Service, as part of its deer management campaign, installed something like about 400 to 500 of 2-bunk and 4-bunk, 6-bunk, all the way 2, 4 and 6-bunk forestry huts, as they're called, throughout New Zealand, generally in remoter areas, generally linked by tracks of about 4 hours apart, and they were for deer cullers to take on the deer. I think they were successful at shooting deer. They weren't very successful in getting rid of the deer, which was later replaced by helicopter shooting and also live recovery. So that's when I got some background more then on these huts, because they came into the Department of Conservation back in 1987, and they sort of languished in the backcountry, and over many years sort of became, I think, probably a pain in the posterior for the department, rather than, because they had low numbers. Some of the Takatimus mountains would probably get visited about once a year maybe by a party. And so, yeah, they certainly not somewhere where the department could recover costs very easily. So some background on huts in New Zealand. There's a long history before the Forestry Service put in the huts of clubs putting in huts. Some of the tramping clubs, Tarua Tramping Club, Alpine Club, were building huts and still are building huts. But when the Department of Conservation took over the forestry huts, there was a feeling that there was something in our, we'd lost something in our culture. The department was sort of running the huts the way they thought they wanted to, we felt at the time, and we didn't really feel very much included. In fact, in some areas there was sort of pretty much straight out opposition by the department employees to be very friendly, I reckon, and to allow volunteers to be involved in doing up huts. The amount of paperwork you might find everyone would find overwhelming. And the New Zealand Deerstalkers Association and Federated Mountain Clubs, is just more background, which I'll just touch on, hadn't enjoyed very good relations for over 20 years, stemming on a fairly minor point of our views on killing deer with poison. That came to a bit of a change over the last few years, where a few of us, Rob Brown, Jeff Sparepoint, myself, and also Kevin O'Connor, who was Deputy Director General in the Department of Conservation, felt that we needed to find a solution that could look at dealing with huts and tracks, these backcountry huts that really were starting to become neglected. At the same time, we rebuilt our relationship with the Deerstalkers Association, and then there was a wonderful stirring of the pot, facilitated by the department, where Trail Fund, who looks after mountain bikes in the front country and been building tracks for Deerstalkers and ourselves, came together and formed the Outdoor Recreation Consortium, representing about 30,000 members all up. And we were basically given the challenge of applying for money out of the Community Conservation Fund and basically looking up, refurbishing and doing up huts. We looked at this pretty suspiciously, because we're talking substantial amounts of money. In the first year was $600,000, and that's a lot of money by anyone's, unless you're building a brand new hut at Plateau maybe. But for us it was a lot of money, and we had to look at the political side of it too. Were we supporting a neoliberalism paradigm of the private-public partnership, and how far would the push become, and how long would it take before that we became the only people looking after huts of the department? Could we take that on? Where would this relationship take us if it all went wrong? I mean, and there's plenty of things where it could go wrong, from insurance to basically membership backlash. We could think of all sorts of things that might not be able to work. And with Federated Mountain Clubs, we thought, well, actually, in the end, what would we do if we said no? And we decided we'd go for it. It took a bit of thinking. There's some rules that we had to take on, and partly to do with it's been mentioned before, the asset charge the department has. So The work, the money, because it was coming through the Department of Conservation, had to be on public conservation land. They also can be onto Uruwera. New assets cannot end up being owned by the department. The last thing the Department of Conservation would want is someone is due to give them an expensive asset because they just get to pay for it for the next 100 years every year. And we also pointed out the department, we can't prioritise huts and tracks other than with our feet. So the department's got a wonderful list of every hut that it owns and what priority it should have. We were saying, actually, we can't do that. If we've got no one interested in going to the hut that's the most, most needy, well, I'm afraid we can't do much about it if people want to do the second best hut. So, having said that, we would only fund projects that had genuine merit. And we made a decision very early on that we wanted to fund at least contribute to one major new infrastructure each year. And the thinking behind that was that these huts, there's about 1,000 huts the department has, probably about 1,200 all over in New Zealand, owned by everyone. One burns down, gets squashed, gets carried away, or otherwise comes to a sticky end each year. And we felt that probably to keep the numbers up, we should be at least contributing to one new hut a year. The other year we put quite a bit of money into the Mid-Tasman hut, which we're still very keen to see, and at the moment the Kaimai Ridgeway. We're also very keen to keep bureaucracy to a minimum. We realised a lot of people just wanted to get out there with the hammer and nails and the helicopter and do the work. So we made a firm decision that we would shield our volunteers for as much bureaucracy as we could. What we learnt was there was a huge amount of enthusiasm for the project of looking after huts and tracks by volunteers. Some people like looking after vintage cars, some people love looking after vintage huts. People love to put something rather back, especially the areas where they've been, and where I asked the question time before about that sense of community ownership. That is where you can have a tangible way of doing this. We could spend a lot more money than we've been given and we've applied for, and it's diminishing. There is a lot of administrative overhead. The first year we carried it because the rules didn't allow for any administration, but I can promise you that if you give money to an organisation with no administration, then basically you are just funding the experts to do the tedious low-level administration. We put our administrator and secretariat onto this. We knew we'd carry a loss, but we felt it was going to be worth the effort. This last year, we actually get our administration paid for through this. And we've found there's a need to share ideas. Look, I mean, what we find, and I think it was touched for by Mike Davies, that there's this feeling that the professionals always know best, and that's not always true. In fact, there are a lot of dock staff who are actually not very comfortable at all being in the outdoors, let alone actually fixing a hut or anything. That's not to say that the amateurs are experts either, but if you can meld the two together, especially if you can get some old forestry workers and carpenters, if you get some builders on board, there are some fantastically good dock staff who know about fixing up and working on huts and know all about NZFS 76 huts. You can actually, by putting all the ideas together, you can end up with some fantastic results. And last year, we ran a conference and it was jam-packed with dock staff and volunteers, and you could see that everyone, and I, without exception, was learning from everyone else. Professionals, amateurs, people who thought they had all the answers, found some more answers still. It was fantastic. So we've funded well over 100 projects around the country. I think it's about 120 at the moment. We've helped volunteers to be inspire people to go on to do further projects. And one of the things that we're really learning to do is recreating a culture that the huts are ours in the wider sense, and we're all feeling a lot richer for it. And I don't want to go too deeply into this one, but we're learning to work with Doc, and Doc's learning to work with us, and shaping ourselves as we go. We've found some recalcitrant people on our side. We've found some recalcitrant people on the department side. They've all been knocked into shape, and those who haven't will shortly be so, because there is support from a very high level for this project, and you heard Lou talking about it in glowing terms yesterday. So what I think we've changed is even more fundamental than just fixing huts. What we've done, we've had a whole mindset change, and not everyone's quite got there yet, but most people have. And we've gone from users of huts saying, Doc should fix their huts for us, shouldn't they, to hey, we can help Doc look after our huts, can't we? And that's an amazingly important paradigm shift. And I have to say, it has really cemented the efforts we've been working on to have more collegial relations with the Deerstalkers Association and Federated Mountain Clubs. And we've found a whole lot of new friends in Trail Fund. It's just been a fantastic partnership all round with things that we never, ever anticipated. Well, what do we do next? We've got to continue the momentum we've got. I think if we were to stop, there would be a lot of disgruntled people. There are people, and I should have mentioned earlier, who are doing some of this work under Permalat, a volunteer group, but there's a scale problem there, and we encourage them to be involved as well. But we've got to continue this momentum that's growing. We've got to find a more secure way of increasing our funding, and we're working very closely with Mike Slater, Deputy Director General, on ways to do that. We've all got to improve our techniques and the way we operate. And what we want to do is integrate the work the volunteers do with the work Doc does. I mean, we could do simple things like actually have volunteers taking hut check sheets with them on every tramping trip, so that instead of Doc having to fly into every hut once a year to write out a maintenance report and then use the maintenance budget up doing that, we could actually have volunteers going through there and writing out interim reports using the same Doc reporting system, and then maybe only every 5 years Doc has to go and do a complete survey, all sorts of things like that. So there we are. I'm not going to tell you which one that is, but some of these renovations are pretty substantial, but I think you can see there's a hut that's desperately looking a bit short of love, and down to the bones. By the time we're finished, not quite a brand new hut, but so close that it would have another 50 years life in it. So that's my talk. Thank you.